Hello everybody, it's Sarah and it is time for my yearly Pride recommendations video. Before we get into that though, I realized with the last video that I edited that on video you can hear the planes that are flying over my house way louder than I can. So I am very sorry for that, but it is the time of year where I won't close my windows anymore because otherwise it is hot and we need the fresh air. So yes, anyway, I don't even hear it anymore, but yeah, I live like directly in a line where some of the planes leave from the airport in Vienna and also arrive, I guess. So yeah, sorry for that. Anyway, it's Pride, so that means it's time for my yearly Pride recommendations, queer recommendations video. And I actually had troubles with that this year a little bit because I have already done these videos in the past 3 years and it kind of feels like I have given you all the recommendations of all the books that I read already because I read 90% series. So if I have mentioned a series already that wasn't finished, and then in the past years like 50 to 70% of the queer books that I read were part of those series that I already mentioned, I'm not gonna usually mention them in the videos again. However, I have decided to like open up what I'm gonna talk about a little bit, so we won't just talk about adult fantasy in this video. We will also talk about a couple of YA books and also a little bit of science fiction. So because of that, I have now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 Pride recommendations to talk about, so let's get into it. But as always, before I can actually give you the recommendations, so just very quickly, what makes a queer book for me? A queer book for me is a book where either the main character or one of the main characters or multiple of the main characters are queer, where the author is queer. If the author is openly queer, I don't care how queer the contents of the books are, it's a queer book. And then the last thing is if just like generally everything surrounding the book and the contents, if it's world building, if it's side characters, whatever, is so hella queer that it doesn't even matter if the main character isn't queer. So yes, those are the, I guess, ways that I count a book as queer. And as always, I will try not to go too much into the books. I will tell you what type of queerness the book is. And aside from that, let's get into it. So let's start with YA, and let's start with a duology of an author that I did mention in one of these videos previously. However, I talked about their adult books that I had read and not about her YA stories. And the author I'm talking about is Tessa Gratton. This is a duology of 2 more or less companion novels because the stories in each of the books are contained. However, I would still recommend reading them one after the other. In the first one, we follow Nothing, who lives in the palace of this country and is the best friend or one of the best friends of Prince Kieran. And one day Kieran is kidnapped and Nothing suspects it to be the sorceress who eats hearts. Nothing really is one of the only people who suspects her because the sorceress who eats hearts usually only kidnaps girls and women. However, Nothing knows a secret about the prince that I think only one other person knows as well, and so Nothing goes on this journey to get the prince back. I just really enjoy these. These are also some of the books where it's really hard to tell you or to define what representation is in them because both of them are just so hella queer. There's like gender queerness, there's different sexualities, there's identity stuff in there. Also, the author himself is queer and also uses all pronouns, so she, he, they, and yes, I love them. Like, the author and the books, to be honest, because the author has amazing writing. I love all of the books by that author, by Tessa Gretchen. Next, another YA that it's been a while since I finished the series, however, I really enjoyed it. And by the way, typically when I enjoy YA, it is the type of YA that is written for an older audience. However, not necessarily the type of audience that will enjoy like fantasy romance and new adult kind of stuff. Like there's two types of, I would say, of like crossover appeal fantasy YA stories, and one is more the like epic adult high fantasy that is just written for an older audience, and the other one is like more fantasy romance type stuff with older characters. And the book that I'm talking about is Crown of Feathers, or the series, which is a trilogy. This is set in this very South American inspired world, and it's one of those series that is kind of really hard to sum up for you what it's about, because it's just like so sprawling and so complicated. But basically a long time ago there were two sisters who had a war, and now like it's still the fallout of this war. In the course of the war, people who were able to kind of influence animals with magic were being outlawed. And so now those people are part of a secret rebellion. And there's also Phoenix Riders, as you might be able to tell from the cover of this book. And we follow, I believe it was 2, maybe 3 POV characters. And one of the main POV characters that we follow is a young man who is gay, and his romance is also one of the more central romances of the storyline. However, this is definitely one of those series where the plot and the political and the action stuff is more important than the romance. Also, I'm sorry, there's light coming right now. I can't help it. I did close the blinds actually, but because I have the window slightly open, they're not completely closed. Yeah, I really enjoyed this back when I read it. I enjoyed it enough that I am still interested in the author, even though she does mostly write YA. I'm not sure if the author is queer, but the characters definitely were, or some of the characters. The next author is the last YA author I want to talk about, and also the first science fiction author I'll talk about, and it's Joran Zhao, who is genderqueer themselves, or non-binary, I think. And the book I'm talking about is obviously Iron Widow. I am still, I think right now, the latest news possibly might be that we might still get Heavenly Tyrant by the end of the year. However, I'm still keeping my hopes up, basically. Iron Widow is a retelling of the only female emperor of China, and it's set in this futuristic world with mecha robots that have to be like piloted by a male-female duo. However, in most cases the woman dies because her power is completely, her life source is basically completely used up by piloting the like thing. And yeah, it's about our main character who wants to get revenge because her sister died piloting these mecha robots beings. And so she joins the army also and is paired up with the most powerful of the pilots, who also happens to be a criminal and murderer as far as she knows. This is also YA that is very much on the older end of YA. It's also polyamorous, and since everything that's polyamorous is queer, this is obviously very queer as well. In these type of Pride videos, I do like to recommend books that maybe I didn't personally love that much, because I just love sharing queer authors out there, and obviously I won't be sharing books I hated or I really disliked. However, there's sometimes books that weren't for me that I still think generally are good, and the next 2 books that I will talk about are those types of books. First, I have Ancillary Justice by Ann Leckie. To be honest, I do not remember anything from the plot. However, this was definitely more hard sci-fi. I think there was also something about getting revenge on an emperor or empire or something, and something that I really appreciated is that there's a lot of genderqueer world building within the story, and there's a lot of places that the character, or some places that the main character visits, maybe even like in general in the entire empire, where basically everyone is kind of genderqueer in like the way we would judge it, but obviously it's very normal in this society. So yes, that's why I just very quickly wanted to mention this as well. And the next one I have is The Red Scholar's Wake by Aliette de Bodard. The reason why this one personally wasn't for me is because it is very romance heavy, and also in general Aliette de Bodard's writing is just not necessarily my favorite writing. It's not a writing that I personally can get into a lot. However, I don't think that there's anything particularly wrong with it. Aliette de Bodard is also queer herself. I do not right now, off the top of my head, know quote-unquote what type of queer. She uses she, her pronouns. To be honest, I feel kind of uncomfortable like trying to dig into the private sphere of authors. So usually what I do for these videos is just I very quickly go into Twitter bios, look at what pronouns they have, etc. And sometimes I just know things because I have followed authors for a longer time and they talk about those things regularly. Anyway, with this one, this is a sapphic space opera, and it's between a fugitive slash prisoner and a ship, basically, like a personified ship. And I do think if you are into more romance heavy writing and into sapphic writing, then you will like this. It's just like, I'm not the type of person. However, I did still overall, like, I didn't mind this book whatsoever. So I quickly had to change my battery, but the last science fiction I want to talk about is the Takes Salon Duology by Arkady Martin. This is also sapphic, and it's a space opera, and I will leave my review for it down below because like this is another one that's pretty complicated to talk about. However, I absolutely loved and adored it. It's the reason why I got the broken binding editions of the Takes Salon Duology. It basically follows an ambassador from a little, it wasn't a planet, but like space station, who is sent to the center of this empire to make sure that they aren't annexed by this empire. And while there, she just gets caught up in the politics of the empire, etc. And also kind of, you know, finds a connection with the person that is put at her side to make sure that she, you know, doesn't do anything wrong. And aside, this is one of the duologies with the absolute best titles, because A Memory Called Empire, A Desolation Called Peace, excuse me, just anyway, can highly recommend, obviously. I decided to sit down on the other side of the sofa. Sometimes we gotta make life easier for us, not gonna lie. Anyway, next let's get through some historical fantasy type stuff. And first, I can't believe that I never mentioned this in any of the videos. Maybe I just didn't see it, but since I didn't see it, let me mention it here. A Diary of Blood by S.T. Gibson. It's a retelling of The Brides of Dracula. It's polyamorous, it's queer, it's sapphic. The author herself is sapphic, and it's amazing. So yeah, I'm gonna be reading her new book this month, or like, not her latest new book, but An Education in Malice, which is a kind of like companion novel to this one, I think, this month. So yeah, I'm excited for that. Next, I have Niveau and Siren Queen. I also can't believe I haven't talked about this yet. I've talked about all other of Niveau's books that I've read in the previous of these videos. Siren Queen is set in pre-Hays Code era Hollywood, and it follows a young Asian immigrant who wants to become a silver star, and then there's also some speculative magical aspects to it. that just add a lot to the storytelling. Our main character is also sapphic once again, and it's just beautiful and gorgeous. And the thing that I always say with Nivo is there isn't an author out there who can write intimacy like Nivo can. I just love the intimacy scenes in this book as well as The Chosen and The Beautiful so much, and I adore them. And just like, and I purposefully say intimacy and not like spice or anything, because these books are not what would count as spicy on TikTok or whatever. There are some intimate scenes, like there's at least one intimate scene in each of the longer books, but it's just, it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful and gorgeous. Then I have another book that wasn't necessarily for me, but might be for other people, and that's Sister Song by Lucy Holland. The reason why this wasn't for me is because this is multiple POV first-person perspective. So you follow 3 siblings, and all 3 of the siblings are written in first-person perspective, which is something that I usually really just like, I don't like. And the other thing is that I wasn't the biggest fan of 2 of the characters, which obviously also then dampened my interest, especially with it being first-person perspective. However, if you enjoy the characters and if you don't mind first-person perspective, I can definitely recommend this book. And one of the 3 siblings is a trans character who goes through transition and through finding himself in the course of the book. However, I would caution you, there are content warnings for dead naming, for transphobia from parents, from siblings, etc. So be aware of that before going in. But aside from that, I really liked the trans character's journey, and he was pretty much the only one of the main characters that I liked from start to end. And now let's get into the straight adult fantasy. First, very quickly, I want to talk about the N Trilogy by Jacqueline Carey. I did talk about the Kushiel series, like the first Kushiel series, already in a previous video, and I didn't really mention the second Kushiel series because I don't think there's that much point to it, because there's not really that much point to reading it without having read the first one. However, while the Nama series is also part of the Kushiel's legacy universe, it is set a few generations after the other 2 trilogies and is written in a way where I would say it's like, I don't think it would be bad or overly confusing if you decided to pick this up without having read the other 2 first. And this one, out of the 3, is definitely the most queer. Our main character Moirin, without a doubt, very obviously is bisexual. She has multiple lovers who are women in the course of the series, especially in the first book. And yes, overall, I recently only filmed a series review. I only finished this trilogy this month as well. And I can just, yeah, I can recommend the entirety of the Kushiel's Legacy universe, to be honest. But yeah, I had a lot of fun with this one as well. So 3 last books. The first one I have is the Red Winter Chronicles by Ed McDonald. So far, only the first 2 books are out in this series. This is pretty standard adult high fantasy, following a main character who can see the dead, basically. This series, the main character is also bisexual. And yeah, I really enjoyed her interactions with different characters in the series, and kind of her figuring out her sexuality also, and having some issues with that, and having some issues connecting to people also, and opening up to them and trusting them. And then the last 2. First, I have the Denon Dynasty by Ken Liu. I swear, I always forget that this is queer. The first book not so much, because the first book actually has different POV characters than the later books. And generally this is a multi-generational story. However, from the second book onwards, one of the central characters is bisexual, is a woman. And I just constantly forget that she is. And it's not because it isn't well established, it's just because romance, to a certain degree, like, is of so little importance, and it's almost, while there are like romantic involvements that she has, it's almost more important just the general human connection that she has to the characters. So I always forget that those connections actually also have to do with her sexuality. So yeah, but Denon Dynasty by Ken Liu is also queer. I wouldn't count it among the like hella queer series, especially when it comes to the broader world building, etc., but it is definitely queer. And then lastly, I'm sorry. I said at the beginning that I don't usually like mention series twice. I have done so once before already, and I feel like I'm allowed to do so again, because since I filmed my last video where I didn't mention the series, and since it's been 3 years since the video where I did mention the series, but since the last video the final book in the series came out, so I feel like I'm allowed to mention it, right? So the book I'm talking about, or series, is the Rook and Rose series. Of course, my favorite series of all time. One of the main side characters is sapphic, one of the main characters is bisexual. The world building is incredibly queer. It's like one of the most queer world buildings and queer normative world buildings that I've ever read, and queer normative in a way that few authors usually manage, due to the fact that the two authors of this series are anthropologists and archaeologists and folklorists and just know about culture, and because of that, when it comes to queerness, have made a lot of very conscious decisions. And yeah, if you're interested in my full thoughts, I have multiple reviews on this book and on the series, and then also an interview with the authors where I did also talk to them about the queer world building. And of course, for all the books that I talked about that I have reviews on, I will leave them linked down below. So before we go into the ending, I just remembered that I forgot about one book, because it's with a friend right now, and the book I'm talking about is Angels Before Men by Raphael Nicolas. And this is a queer retelling of the fall of Satan following Lucifer, and it's all about queer heaven and queer angels, and you know, discovering sin and how God is actually really abusive. Yeah, I really loved it. I'm gonna read book 2, Angels and Men, this month, hopefully. Still, I still need, like, I know the way the book is written, which is just very beautiful but also very over the top, so I need to wait to be in the perfect mood to pick this up, but I can't wait for it. And now we're done. Tell me in the comments down below, did you find any new books or series that you want to check out? Did you find any books or series that you had heard about but didn't know were queer? Leave all of that in the comments down below. Also tell me your favorite queer fantasy or SFF book or series. If you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. All the links to my social media as well as to my book club will be linked down below, so go and check those out, and I hope I'll see you very soon. Bye!